Thank you, Frank, for that good introduction. Um, I will note that when I served on the Judiciary Committee, the chairman of the committee was a man named Joe Biden, who seems to have done fairly well for himself in the years since, although I can claim very little credit for his great success. But certainly his meeting uh, in the last 2 weeks uh, with Mr. Modi, I think set the table for what is going to be, I think, a very good discussion here um, with someone who I claim as a longtime friend, Jay Panda. And it was marvelous to be introduced by another longtime, both personal friend, but also friend of India, Frank Wisner. In preparation for this, I took a look at my records and realized that um, Mr. Panda and I first met in 2008. And in the past 13 years, we've met many times on both sides of the Atlantic. In the United States, we've met in India. We met on the margins of so many India-US meetings. He is a founding member of the India-US Parliamentary Foundation. It's the context in which we first met. And what I'd like to do today is to build our questions. We'll start big. We'll start on the US-India relationship broadly, which you know so well. We'll talk perhaps about trade and commercial issues, which in the wake of the pandemic are so important. And then we can talk to some of the areas of domestic concern, which you're now focusing on in your role with the BJP. Delhi, Assam, the two states which you oversee. And then perhaps we'll have a few minutes left at the end for you can give us some political insights into how you see the future of U.S.-India, of Indian politics. But it is such a pleasure to see you, and I'm only sorry that we're not sitting on the same stage and having just come off a dinner or a lunch together. But it's marvelous to see you. Jay, you are one of the key founders of the India-US parliamentary grouping. You've met so many times with American members of Congress. You've led delegations of Indian parliamentarians. How do you read U.S.-India relations in the wake of the meetings here in the United States over the last 2 weeks between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi?
Thank you, Nelson. It's a great pleasure to be here on stage with you and Ambassador Frank Wisner, both great friends that I've had the pleasure of working with relating to the India-US bilateral relationship, especially for all these years. I would summarize the status of the relationship today as going from strength to strength. As we've discussed many times over the past 2 decades, the US-India relationship has come together in a way that could not have been imagined even in the mid or late 90s. And this is a fundamental underlying development. It's bipartisan. This has happened through many changes of government in the US and in India. As Prime Minister Vajpayee famously described it almost 2 decades ago, we are natural allies as the 2 largest democracies in the world. Under Prime Minister Modi, I believe the gears have been shifted dramatically. Starting 7 years ago when he first took oath for his first term, Prime Minister Modi surprised a lot of people at how savvy he was about foreign relations and the energy he put into projecting India abroad. And in the process, having worked with now 3 presidents in the US, President Obama, President Trump, and now President Biden, whom he has known for many years on a very personal basis. I will conclude these opening remarks by saying that whether you look at trade, for instance, just a few years ago, when the bilateral trade was at about $80 billion, there was a lot of celebration. We were looking at knocking at the $100 billion mark. And in 2019, we almost touched $150 billion bilateral trade. Of course, the pandemic has caused an interruption in many things, but the Indian economy is roaring back in recent months. And there are many other examples I can give. Let me just conclude by citing a study that was released last month by one of the major think tanks in India called Young India and the World. And a survey in it points out that Indians consider the United States as the most trusted country. I think that should say it all. This would have been a dream for people like me when we were in college in the US a generation ago. This is a wonderful place to have reached, but I think it's still only early days. There is lots of work to be done together between the two largest democracies.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for setting that stage for us. And it leads naturally to my next question, which is the pandemic, which is trade in the pandemic. We, you noted that the pandemic has slowed the growth of trade between the countries. That's natural. It's also, I think we must recognize, it's focused countries all over the world on matters at home. How are our workers doing? What is the health of our people? How can we get our essential medical supplies in a globalized world? How can we ensure that we have access to those? India has become such a powerhouse in the medical field. You are the vaccines producer for the world. But we're now at a time when all countries are looking inward. Their voters are asking them, their citizens are asking them to look inward. As you see the next chapter in U.S.-India relations, as we hopefully and blessedly turn the corner from the pandemic, what are the areas of trade and commerce which you think are the most attractive, should be the most attractive for governments, for both of our governments, but also for our industries? Where are we going to find the most cooperation between our countries?
Nelson, I'm glad you mentioned vaccines. Just last week, India crossed 800 million vaccinations. We are rapidly approaching 1 billion vaccinations. And this is the world's largest vaccine program for COVID-19. We've had challenges because we are just about becoming a middle-income country, and we have a long way to go. Yet, over the past year and a half, India has really stepped up in terms of vast increase in our medical capacities. We had challenges with migrant workers. We had challenges with vaccine shortages in the beginning. We even had hiccups in supplies with some friendly countries. We were helping other nations by exporting medicines, both as aid as well as on preferential terms. We have also been exporting vaccines, but because of a terrible second wave a few months ago, we had to concentrate on getting our population vaccinated first. And we are now reaching a level where normalcy is gradually returning. You can see more activity outside. You can see more meetings in person rather than everything being virtual. And what that means is that the markets have picked up. The GDP growth rate is roaring back. The IMF projects India to have the fastest GDP growth rate in the year going forward. This is good news for the India-US relationship on many counts. So one of the red hot areas of the economy is the startup economy. India now has reached third position in the world in the number of startups, in the number of unicorns and potential unicorns. We are having a large number of IPOs happening. And the reason I mention this is because there is a long American connection in India's growth as an IT powerhouse, as a technology powerhouse. And many of these new unicorns and startups in India have funding from US-based funds and venture capitalists and companies. I would like to say that let me not limit our relationship to any one sector. So in this boom, we are seeing a phenomenal growth of infrastructure. People who saw India less than a decade ago are surprised by the quality and the scale of our airports and the expressways and the large number of new ports. All of this, I mentioned a little bit earlier that 77% of young Indians view the US as the most trusted country. And so I think the potential exists in infrastructure, in IT sector, of course, in core industrial sector areas, service sectors. We do need to take advantage of this. I think there's tremendous potential. There are discussions going on about how we improve market access both ways for Indian companies and Indians to the US and vice versa.
Thank you. Let me draw you to an area that you know so well, which is the cooperation between the U.S. Congress and the Indian Parliament. You've been engaged with so many on so many delegations and hosted so many delegations there in India. Right now, in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the chair of the South Asia Subcommittee is a good friend, Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut, who is a skilled foreign policy practitioner in his own right. And India is fortunate to have such a careful student of foreign affairs heading that subcommittee. As we get back to a time when we might be able to have delegations going back and forth, are there particular areas that you would like to see the parliamentarians on both sides of the ocean combine in the years ahead?
Indeed. As you pointed out, Nelson, I chaired the India-US Parliamentary Forum for 15 of the 19 years I served in Parliament. You yourself and Ambassador Wisner have hosted us on many occasions and vice versa here. I think I am personally raring to go again to have visits both ways, to have Cordels come here and to have Indian parliamentarians visit the US. Because although the relationship has always been very good on a business-to-business basis on individuals, there are a large number of Americans of Indian origin and Indian students in America. But this relationship between legislators is equally important because we understand as democracies that the executive branch, the administrations, need to sell these ideas of building relationships to their legislatures. And that's why this is so crucial. One of the areas I hadn't mentioned yet is defense. Now, again, 20 years ago, it would have been unthinkable for India and the US to have this kind of a large defense relationship. Just 3 or 4 years ago, we were celebrating that India had reached a level of acquiring $10 billion worth of US defense equipment. In the meantime, that's gone up to $20 billion. Now keep in mind that in all previous years before the last 20, it had added up to only $500 million, $500 million. So to reach a level of $20 billion acquisition is huge. But I want to point out that India is working very hard to develop its own capacities. The Make in India emphasis of Prime Minister Modi is giving a huge boost to our defense sector as well as many other sectors in the economy. So I would like to urge American friends to look at the larger picture, to look at cooperation, not just for defense equipment and technology, but we have a strategic relationship that goes beyond just the bilateral. The Quad, for instance, India, US, Japan, and Australia, 4 mission to deal with geopolitical challenges. This is something that is keeping on getting strengthened and has recently, with Prime Minister Modi's visit and discussions with President Biden and the heads of government of the other 2 nations, has again taken a big step forward. So I think there is absolutely a whole panorama of things that we ought to be working on, and I would urge counterparts in the U.S. Senate and Congress to keep that in mind. There's no question
that the strategic role of India looms very large in Washington these years. We no longer talk about the Asia Pacific, we talk about the Indo Pacific, and that is conscious on our part because we need to ensure that India is a key part of our strategies for looking at Greater Asia and looking at the balance of power in Greater Asia and looking for our friends. Who are the people with whom we share values? And as you point out, who are the people with whom we can confidently share technologies that are sensitive and that are of military value? In the 4 or 5 minutes that are left for us, I'd like to take you closer to home. You're one of the national spokespersons for the BJP. You are in charge for two very different states, Delhi and Assam. I've visited Delhi many times. I would love to have the opportunity to visit Assam someday. How do you see your role in domestic politics? And then perhaps you might end us with a few words about the broader political spectrum in India in the years ahead.
The BJP is the world's largest political party with the membership of something around 100. And I think the opportunities are, India is of a continental proportion. There are many opportunities across the nation.
Good. Well, thank you, and I accept. I will go to Assam anytime we can work that out. It has been such a pleasure to spend this time with you. I think everyone in our audience sees how lucky we are to have you on the Indian side of these powerful India-US coalitions. You know the US so well, you know the relationship so well, you know your politics so well, and frankly, you know our politics so well. So as someone who has known you a long time, sipped tea with you, and perhaps other things over time, I look forward to the future arc of your career and of the roles that you're playing in the BJP, and indeed in a return to active political life on your own, which as a non-Indian, I might say, I hope that lies in your future. What a pleasure to have you. Thank you to USISPF. Thank you to Mukesh Aghi. And thanks to you, Jay, for taking the time to join us. And have a good evening.
Thank you very much.